You ready? Okay. So welcome to the first meeting of the HKS Energy Policy Seminar. I'm Joe Aldi, a member of the faculty here at the Harvard Kennedy School, and it's my pleasure to host the seminar again this academic year. We're operating this semester seminar in a hybrid format, so we're thrilled to have so many friends, colleagues, alumni joining us via Zoom here today, and thrilled to have a full room, standing room only. Apologies, the fire marshal won't let us have any more chairs in here for today's talk. Before I introduce our speaker, first I want to make a few notes of appreciation. First, I'd like to thank the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, the Mosava Rahmani Center for Business and Government, and the Salada Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard for their support of this seminar series. I'd also like to express my appreciation to Ricardo Mora and Liz Hanlon for all of their work making the seminar series go smoothly. Thank you. I also want to remind you, happy Harvard Climate Action Week. So thrilled to have this as one of our events kicking off the first day of Harvard Climate Action Week. We have events all over the university campus, focused on ways we can marshal our ideas, evidence, and insights to address the challenges of a changing climate. The Salada Institute for Climate and Sustainability will be hosting the Harvard Climate Symposium on Friday and Saturday at Claremont Hall, across the river at HBS, and on live stream. For those of us who are joining on Zoom, Liz will drop into the Zoom chat a link for you to get more information about Harvard Climate Action Week. And I'm thrilled to have an old friend and former colleague with us to kick off the seminar series and Harvard Climate Action Week here at the Kennedy School. Chris Smith is here for his talk about ways in which we're going to electrify transportation. He is the Chief Government Affairs Officer for Ford. There, he leads a global team that promotes legislation, regulations, and policies with governments around the world to advance the Ford Plus plan for growth and value creation. Prior to his experience at Ford, Chris was Senior Vice President of Policy, Government, and Public Affairs at Cheniere Energy, the world's second largest liquefied natural gas operator. During the Obama administration, Chris served as the Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy, and impressively, he worked all 8 years. We had the opportunity to work together the first couple of years. I could only manage 2, and I was exhausted. Chris had an incredible endurance and served in that administration all 8 years for President Obama. Chris began his career as an officer in the U.S. Army after graduating from West Point with a bachelor's degree in engineering management and mechanical engineering. He also holds an MBA from Cambridge University and a degree in applied math from American Public University. Chris, welcome to the Energy Policy Seminar.
Thanks so much. So thanks so much, Joe, for that kind introduction. So and I'm super flattered to be the lead-off speaker here for Climate Week. So that's super special. So thanks Joe for having me here. Thanks Elaine for your time this morning. I think we've got some really awesome things to work on, to collaborate on here. So I'm Chris Smith. I'm the Chief Government Affairs Officer for the Ford Motor Company. So we make cars. We actually have a history right here in Cambridge, right? So in 1914, the Ford Motor Company established a manufacturing facility here in Cambridge. We moved that to Somerville in 1926 and operated in Somerville from 1926 to 1958, assembling vehicles. So we've been gone for a minute, but if you go to Somerville Assembly Row and Assembly Square, that's named for that Ford assembly plant. So we've got a footprint right here in Cambridge. So hopefully that'll show up in one of your pop quizzes. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about cars, a little bit about policy, about how policy impacts the way that we think about the automotive industry, the things we do to innovate for our customers, to create jobs here in the United States. I've been at Ford for about 4 years. So I've spent most of my career in energy. So I was Assistant Secretary for Energy during the Obama administration. I spent time at Chevron and at Texaco and at Cheniere. And so this is the first time that I've actually worked for a consumer product company, and particularly one that does something as I think important as making cars. So a really, really different kind of experience than working in other areas, because cars are really different. You know, when I worked for, so I was, I worked for a company called Cheniere before I came to Ford. And so Cheniere is a natural gas exporter. And so if I'd be, you know, at a cocktail party and someone would say, what do you do? I say, I work for Cheniere. And they say, Cheniere, what's that? Well, it's a LNG company. LNG, what's that? Well, it's liquefied natural gas. I mean, essentially when you use natural gas, you move it in pipelines to get it to use centers. So you use it for industrial uses, you know, for home uses, for all sorts of uses. But when you want to export it, you can't transmit it because it's in a gaseous form. So you take it and you put it through multiple stages of compression. You lower the temperature down to hundreds of degrees beneath zero. Then it turns into a liquid, and you can put it in these cryogenic ships, and you can ship it. And by then, you know, the person has kind of wandered off because they don't want to hear about it. It's super uninteresting. But when you talk to people about cars, you know, cars is something that, first of all, super important for our economy, but it's also a purchase. It's more than just a thing that you buy. You know, it'll be, aside from your house, the most valuable thing that you own will be your car, generally. It's something that extends into the world, part of your personality, who you are. You project who you are by the vehicle that you drive in many cases, right? So you see what a person drives, and you know a little bit about kind of who they are and what they're about. You rely on your car. It's a product that you get inside of. You count on that vehicle to do the thing that needs to do in order to move you around, to get you to places, but also to keep you safe. So cars are a different kind of product, right? So as all of you think about your futures, you'll have opportunities to go work for consultants or banks, but if you come to Ford, you'll get to actually kind of make stuff. So that's my pitch for Ford, right? So I'm going to talk about three broad things here, and I'll try not to run too long so we can get to the Q&A, which I think is the most interesting part of these things. So I'll talk a little bit about the challenges of electrification. You know, what does it mean to move to different types of powertrains? And what are the other broader things that a company like Ford has to do in order to be successful in what we see as being the economy of the future? We'll talk a little bit about the policy levers. And so in policy levers, we'll talk about tax policy, talk very briefly about tariffs, and talk very briefly about environmental policy. Three things that are really critically important to our ability to invest well in the United States and create jobs and opportunities here in the US. And the last, we'll talk a little bit about the global market, kind of how we see the automotive market forming up. And hopefully I'll say just enough to maybe seed some ideas about some questions when we have our Q&A back and forth. So a little bit about electrification. So Ford's a 120-year-old company. We've been around for a long time. So I've been at the company for about 4 years, and I'll say that in the 4 years that I've been here, and maybe the few years before that, Ford as a company has undergone a greater amount of change, and I can say this without hyperbole, a greater amount of change than we've seen in the preceding 100 years, right? Incredible amount of new things that we have to think about in terms of the way that we design vehicles, how we manage supply chains, what the powertrains of the future are going to look like. And importantly, what is the overall experience that our customers are going to expect as we develop and implement new technologies? So incredible amount of change, right? Some of you might have seen, there was a movie called Ford versus Ferrari that some of you might have seen a couple of nodding heads. So, you know, we'll tell you much of that movie is fiction, right? It's exciting, interesting. But there's a grain of truth in any kind of historical fiction movie that you see. So in that movie, there are two villains in the movie. Like, so the first villain, like the most obvious villain, is you know, the Ferrari, the Italians, like beautiful cars, the swoopy cars, they win everything, they got the beautiful suits. So that's like the first kind of villain of the movie. And the second villain of the movie is the Ford Motor Company. It's the monolithic, 100-year-old bureaucratic place where you've got layers and layers upon layers of bureaucracy. And you've got the protagonist, the hero, Carroll Shelby, who has to fight through the Ford bureaucracy to go and win the races and, you've got your Hollywood ending. So there's there's a lot of historical liberties that the movie takes, but there's some grain of insight that we see and we recognize when we look at that, like how the company has to take generations after generations after generations of process and tradition and turn that on its head. And so we now have all of these challenges that we have to kind of undertake. So when you look at how Ford has looked at electrification, so we've got two model vehicles, that are mass market consumer vehicles. We've got the Lightning, the F-150, which is the electric truck, popular, and then we've got the Mach-E, which is the two-row Mustang crossover. So two electric vehicles. So Ford kind of attacked electrification like right in the middle. So we didn't do something on the peripheries. We took our two most valuable products, our two most valuable brands, and we electrified those brands. An important thing to think about here, right? Which is when we thought about electrification, we didn't strive to create, a compliance vehicle that's going to allow us to comply with a set of rules that's going to be made and updated and changed by a subsequent series of administrations. We actually endeavored to create a vehicle that was going to surprise and delight and thrill our customers, because we see that as being the pathway to having a successful implementation of electrification. So that's core of to what how the company thinks about electrification. One thing you'll hear Jim Farley, our CEO, say is that we don't need the government to tell us to make electric cars. Like, we see the existential necessity of being the best electric car maker in the world, and the great competition and challenges we have ahead of us, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we've got to make cars that our customers demand, and that's key to what we're looking at. So as we think about the design of the vehicles of the future, how we design them, how they look, creating that demand, creating a must-have vehicle for us is incredibly important. And if you're someone like me who has spent a big portion of my career kind of working on climate issues, you'll know that if we have this goal of mid-century decarbonization, that vehicles are going to be a really important part of it. And that a big piece of having that work is creating a set of solutions where you're minimizing the compromises and you're maximizing the benefits of the product that you're creating. So there's something really useful to be done by creating a product that customers love. So those original two vehicles, the ones that are on the market now, the Lightning, the F-150, and the Mustang, the Mach-E, they're in many ways, they're built really quickly, really effective. So in terms of the stats of the vehicle, how they drive, the acceleration, the performance, really, really top flight vehicles, but they're essentially retrofitted internal combustion engine vehicles who already existed, right? If you took the Lightning, if you look at that F-150 pickup truck, it looks just like the standard gas, like F-150 truck. You take the battery out, you take the gas tank out, you put a battery in, take the engine out, you put some motors in, change a little bit of the profile, but essentially you have a vehicle that's built on the bones that we've been homologating for decades with that best-selling F-150. The vehicle of the future is going to be fundamentally different. We're going to have to get the cost down. If we're going to have better range, the range is going to have to come from better implementation of technology, better aerodynamics. We can't simply continue to make bigger and bigger and bigger batteries. So there's a lot that we're doing to try to ensure that we're moving forward to bring an affordable vehicle to our customers. It's probably our single most important driver right now. So in one of our previous earnings calls, in our last earnings call, our CEO talked about a Model T moment, and that's a phrase he used in that conference call. And that was about an innovation that we're about to roll out in Kentucky. So when you think about the significant, important thing that Henry Ford brought to American manufacturing, the Model T was a vehicle. It's the thing that the silhouette, the story about the Model T and all that did for transportation, also for manufacturing and for wages. But the significant thing that we did was not necessarily the vehicle. It was the process for creating the vehicle. It was that assembly line, right? That if you go to an assembly plant in Michigan or in Mexico or in China, you see that same assembly plant. And so what we rolled out just a few days or a few weeks ago was the first major update to the way you think about assembling vehicles that the industry has made probably since we started building Model Ts. So instead of having a single sequential assembly line, you'll have what we call an assembly tree, where you're able to build the vehicle in modules. It allows you to do your vehicle manufacturing in a way that's a lot more efficient. It's better for workers. You can access all the pieces of the vehicles in ways that are more effective. We're able to remove the necessity to have certain components in the vehicles. We're able to cast certain parts of the vehicle in a way that's more efficient, all with the goal of reducing the cost of the vehicle, because in the end, it's going to be incredibly important for us to get to a vehicle that has a lower cost. And so that's a big investment that we're making in the state of Kentucky that's going to, we think, going to be an important step, not only in making the manufacturing more efficient, but giving us a way to bring to market a set of innovations that Ford is working on to create the future of digital vehicles. A second thing I want to mention or talk about is our issue of supply chain. So if I look at the broader kind of policy issues around the vehicle, around the road to electrification, that have changed the way we think about policy, the supply chain is a big piece of that. So as you're thinking about batteries, suddenly we're thinking about lithium and cobalt and nickel and manganese and all of the components that go into batteries. Not only hard rock extraction, but figuring out how you're going to take all of these raw materials and refine them and get them to the specs that you need to actually go into the batteries, and how you shorten those supply chains and make them more reliable. During COVID, we saw some real challenges around the supply chain opacity around semiconductors. Because one thing that you note is, for making a car, you can't make a car with 99% of the parts. Like, you have to have every single piece. And so having an issue where you can't get access to any piece of your supply chain is a link in the chain that can actually be very, very detrimental to the company. We're also thinking about batteries and battery chemistries and battery geometries. So, we're implementing a factory in Michigan. We're going to be making LFP, lithium iron phosphate batteries, and we think is going to be an important battery chemistry to lower the cost of commercial vehicles for our customers. And then we also make NCM nickel, cobalt, manganese batteries in our plants in Kentucky and in Tennessee. So 2 separate battery chemistries. And then last, the thoughts around charging and charging utilities. So this is something that we don't control directly. Like, we don't have our own charging network at Ford. But as we develop the vehicles for the future, and we're trying to create a world in which we can roll those vehicles out to customers and they can utilize them to the greatest potential, one of the sticky points is going to be the reliability and the efficiency and the availability of that charging network. So how do we make sure that our customers have access to charging, and how do you get that seated in a way that's effective? Because if you don't have enough charging stations, it makes the vehicles less attractive. If people don't buy the vehicles, then it makes it harder to create a business model around charging. And what do you do that's going to kind of reverse some of those dynamics? So kind of pivoting to policy, I'll make a couple of observations. Like, first, in almost every major transition that we've had technologically, there's been some catalytic role that government has played. Now, again, if government has to prop up an industry, if it has to hold it or sustain it, it's going to fail. But in almost every major technological leap that our economy's made, be it telecommunications or space travel or energy, like even thinking about innovations around shale gas, hydraulic fracturing. Much of that early research, the earliest stuff, when it was pre-commercial, there has been some catalytic government role for that. So we see that being, in some cases, having some parallel opportunities here to make sure that we're encouraging processes, we're encouraging policies that help move the U.S. economy forward. And the second thing I'll say before we go to a couple of specific points is that the effectiveness of any policymaker, as we talk to policymakers in Washington, D.C. and other places, your policy is going to be effective if you're able to draw a straight line between the thing that you do in policy and the way that companies that are deploying capital are going to react, right? Because that's the thing that's going to make you effective as a policymaker, is being able to see, if I do X, it's going to create foreseeably this reaction Y that then leads you to the desired outcome. And so that's the goal of policymakers. That's a thing that's hard to do. It's a thing that I remember when I was in government that you struggle with, is trying to connect your actions back to what the decision makers that are deploying capital are going to do. So I'll point to three specific things we're working on right now, which is tax policy, tariff policy, and environmental policy, all huge spaces. So I'll just say a word or two on each of those without diving too deep. So first, tax policy. What we're shooting for is consistency, 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 and I'll say that for all three of these. But for tax policy, we spent a lot of time watching the reconciliation package come through Congress. It's now been signed into law by the president, which retain the production tax credit. The production tax credit is a $45 per kilowatt hour credit, refundable credit that goes to the manufacturer of qualifying domestic batteries in the United States. It's a credit upon which a lot of companies have made really big investments throughout the United States, Georgia and Tennessee and Kentucky and Michigan. And so maintaining that credit was really important to create an environment of stability where, again, the decision makers who are deploying capital have the confidence to make those investments. On tariffs, a tariff is a tool. It can be a really important tool. As with tax policy, with tariff policy, we're looking at trying to encourage, some degree of consistency. We know that our integrated North American supply chain is really important for our ability to manufacture vehicles in the United States. So when you look at Ford, we already have a very large manufacturing base here. So 80% of the vehicles that we sell in the United States, Ford assembles here in the US. So we already have, so we're the most American brand in terms of the number and percentage of vehicles that we assemble in the United States. We also rely on this integrated North American supply chain that allows us to get efficient aluminum from Canada, allows us to access supply chains in Mexico that are consistent with the USMCA, the trade agreement that was negotiated in the first Trump administration. And it's the existence of that supply chain that allows us to ensure that we're able to continue creating jobs in Tennessee and in Kentucky and in Illinois and in Ohio. Really important for us. So having a tariff policy that actually incentivizes companies to invest in the United States and to assemble in the United States, we think is really important. The policy is complicated because you have tariffs on things, the 232 tariffs that are tariffs on auto parts and cars and components and steel and aluminum. You have tariffs on places, which is the 301 tariffs and the IEEPA tariffs that are overseen by the Treasury Department, those tariffs on places. The Liberation Day tariffs that were announced on the 2nd of April, the fentanyl tariffs, et cetera. And then you also have tariffs that are promulgated through treaties, like the USMCA tariffs, the most favored nation tariffs. So all these tariffs are also overseen by different pieces of the government, by the Commerce Department, by the Treasury Department, by the U.S. trade representative. So working together to create a structure that accomplishes the desired outcome of creating more innovation, more investment in the United States is something we think it's in the U.S.'s best interest. It's something that's very aligned with what we're trying to do at Ford, and it's a big piece of our policy driver. And the last thing I'll say very briefly is on environmental regulations. So again, our policy on environmental regulations has been that there should be one standard. One of our challenges is, when you got essentially three major legs to the stool. You've got the standards that come out of California, you got the EPA standards, you got standards that are enforced by the Department of Transportation with CAFE rules. That creates a lot of complexity for a company like Ford. So we believe there should be one standard, should be unified. It should be achievable, because Ford, if we're going to innovate and we're going to invest in the products of the future, because again, we think it's incredibly important that we lead the world in electric vehicles. So if we're going to be able to have that investment, then we're going to have to ensure that we've got achievable standards that allow us to operate profitably so that we can invest in those technologies of the future. So, one of our challenges we see, as we see the standard, move from administration to administration, it makes it tough for Ford to have the stability that we need to ensure that we're able to plan and invest and build for the future. So last, I'll talk a little bit about markets and how we see kind of some of our global challenges. So Ford's an international company. Like 80% of the vehicles we sell in the United States, we make in the U.S., but we're about 50% U.S., 50% international. So we look at headcount, vehicles, cash flow. We are an international company, and there are big challenges that we have in the global market as we see new innovations happening everywhere. And you'll hear Ford commenting on the challenges and opportunities that we have coming out of China. Certainly enormous investments that have been heavily subsidized by the Chinese government, but have yielded really, really impressive results. So we want to make sure that as we think about all the policy drivers in the United States, all the policy drivers that we're executing in the United States, that we're creating a policy environment where we're successful at leading and innovating and investing and competing in a global market. So we don't, like Ford can't live in a world where we build a moat around the US, because we compete everywhere. We compete in the United States, we compete in Asia, we compete in South America, we compete in Australia. And that competition is going to continue to get stronger, be it with securing supply chains, with refining and extracting the critical minerals that we need in order to support our supply chain. The issues around battery and battery chemistry and battery manufacturing. So staying abreast of that global market is going to be something that's of incredible importance to Ford. By conclusion, we've got these big challenges. We're really enthusiastic and confident in our ability to continue to lead. Like, one great advantage that we have and that we understand really well are the drivers that motivate our company, our customers. As we think about designing the products of the future, and we've got a lot of enthusiasm around the products we're putting in front of our customers. The customer is going to lead this effort. It's going to be very difficult to have any sort of policy outcome that's successful that's not led by customers, that you're not designing the products that drive them, and you're not designing those products that become must-have purchases for your customers. So we're really thinking about that. That's the first and last thing we think about in any decision that we make is this product going to be something that we're going to be able to push into the market, and is it going to be demanded by our customers? So our job is to simply design, execute, and make available the best vehicles that are possible. Again, our CEO will tell you that we don't need a mandate to tell us to make electric vehicles, because if we're going to be a company, we're a 120-year-old company. If we're going to be a 240-year-old company, we're going to have to be the best company in the world that makes this simpler vehicle, and that we're not going to just be able to sit on our laurels of making the vehicles that we've made in the past. So we think that's of existential importance for Ford. So maybe I'll pause there. Those are just a couple things we're thinking about in the policy and the development space, and I'd be really interested in see what questions the group might have.
Great, thank you, Chris. So we'll take questions for Chris. Please.
Thank you very much for being here today. Could you expand a little bit more on the charging network and what are the challenges to actually expanding it? Is it only a CapEx cost problem, or are there other bottlenecks? And second part of the question is, are you working with the other manufacturers to maybe share a common charging network? Is it something that you're looking at?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So a really big question there, right? So Tesla was the first innovator in this market, right? They're the first one out there. They built their own charging network because they had to. There was a one company industry for a period of time, and their network is quite good in a lot of ways. So now we're experiencing this as we spread electrification to other areas. There's going to be an ongoing challenge of a chicken and the egg, right? You need the charging network to support what we do. And as we sell more vehicles and as we're more successful at innovating and creating the vehicles the customers want, it's going to create more demand for charging. So there has been, like we've seen, companies that are in this business have struggled in a lot of ways, right? Our customers also become frustrated because there's not good visibility into availability of stations, charging stations, and the quality control is not controlled by Ford or any single company. It's controlled by whatever company is deploying that capital. But then that will then impact companies like Ford. So that is actually a big challenge. So there are some things that we think that you could do that would help that, right? There are some, I mentioned the catalytic role of government. There is the opportunity to create some incentives that help companies to get that business more established and more started. I talked to Elaine this morning about some things we could do about transparency of data, right? Which might be a really cost-effective way of just putting in place a requirement so that a user will actually have better line of sight into the experience they're going to have at this charging station, so that they're able to make their decisions more effectively. And then also we've made I think one real leap over the last couple of years. There's a number of charging standards, and we're coalescing towards one, right? Which is the NACS standard that Tesla has used, right? Smaller plug, better thermal properties. So that also is, a simplification that will make lives for customers a little bit easier. But overall, as we see all the challenges that we've got ahead of us, this is an important one. It's one that customers really focus on, that availability of charging stations.
So, Chris, I see a bunch of hands, but I'm going to jump in the queue.
All right.
The moderator.
You got that.
Exploit the prerogative
right.
Of the chair of the session. You mentioned a little bit there at the end about the environmental policy and environmental regulations and the interest in having consistency. And you noted the challenge that you're making a vehicle that has to comply with a fuel economy standard at Department of Transportation, a tailpipe CO2 standard at EPA, a California standard as well. There was a time in our youth in 2009 when we integrated those. So it was kind of intended to be kind of one consistent, coherent process. I always thought it was a bit odd to think about a world of electrification that would have to operate under a fuel economy standard. And when we look at these are policies that date to 1970, the mid 1970s. Even when we think about tax credits, they're really an evolution of the original hybrid vehicle tax credit that first came online about 25 years ago. When you kind of look to the future, I mean, we see this, we are changing some of the tax credits. We see this administration trying to roll back both California's authority as well as rolling back EPA regulatory authority for this. What do you see in the future as a way to create the right kind of policy framework that makes sense for major auto manufacturers like Ford as they continue to advance electric vehicles?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit of a holy grail question, right? That's a hard one, right? So our position throughout multiple administrations has been very consistent. We think there should be one standard. It's really hard for us to think about producing, making available, marketing, homologating vehicles that comply with various standards, and also having a set of rules that if you create your fleet and your portfolio and your product mix so that you comply here and you're still getting penalized over here, and so you tweak it over here and then you get penalized over there, right? So to have one standard, we think is really important. That the standard needs to be achievable. So when we look at the standard that was put in place by the previous administration, and I'll quote the CEO of our trade association when he referred to that as being at what he called the ragged edge of achievability. Lots of horse trading back and forth in terms of what that curve would look like what companies would have to achieve. And again, like a really incredibly difficult forecasting problem that exists is trying to predict auto sales, particularly when you're going into a new technology that people haven't seen. It's incredibly challenging to try to see around the corner, and you can be off dramatically. In fact, if you look at some of the realignments of the auto companies now, that's a really hard thing to do. So what was on the ragged edge of achievability has fallen off that ragged edge now, right? So that was going to be a real challenge for a company like Ford because we're enthusiastic about the future of all the things we're going to bring to our customers, electric cars, the future of hybrids, with range extender vehicles. A future hybrid will look different than a current hybrid where you've got two separate powertrains. You have one powertrain, it's going to be an electric vehicle, and then you're going to have an internal combustion in the car that extends your range, right? So so again, the three standards: one standard, achievable, and that it gets more stringent over time. Because the last thing I'll mention here, Joe, is that we don't operate in a vacuum. When we take our regulations here that has the requirements for the fleet standards, and we compare that against the UK and Europe and China and Australia, other major markets, there's a fairway there. And that's the direction that the world's taking. And as a global company, I think that the United States needs to be in that fairway somewhere. So those are broad principles, right? Now, like you could write a dissertation on that would actually answer with precision what the policy mechanism looks like. But those are the principles we think that are important for us.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, nice one for your remarks. Really appreciate it. I'm from the UK, and I guess that car culture is a little bit different to car culture in America. But I'm really increasingly interested because uptake in EVs is continuing to grow in the UK. But often many of the things that I hear and what other people seem to hear is like quite negative stories around the challenges, whether it's pricing, charging range. And so I just wanted to get from you more of a sense of what you think companies like Ford can do in telling a positive story about EVs, which obviously is really fundamental to supporting uptake or continued uptake as well.
Yeah. So there's a real clear answer to that. Like the thing that we do is to engineer, design, produce, and make available cars that people love. I mean, that's a start and end of what we have to do. And we can talk about it, we can publicize it, et cetera. So our job is to innovate products that surprise and delight our customers. So that is the one thing that we can do. So if you take the two vehicles that we've got on the market now, the Lightning. So I drive a Lightning, the F-150 electric, which I love. Full size pickup truck, 0 to 60 times like a sports car, over 700 foot-pounds of torque, over 500 pounds of 500 horsepower, incredibly fun truck to drive. I love that vehicle. My wife drives a Mach-E, which is the two-row Mustang crossover, which is our second electric vehicle. Both really, really popular vehicles, both really well reviewed, super fun to drive. Our goal now is to get the costs down, right? As we have to access that next tranche of consumers. When we were in the earliest days of electrification, like we were all competing for enthusiasts, those first adopters, like the person who wants that electric car. And we love selling to first adopters because they want the thing first, that's less price sensitive in many cases. But now as you've worked through that market and we're selling to a much broader cross-section of customers, issues of price and affordability become much, much more important, right? So the truck that we're going to be making in Kentucky, so I mentioned, this new assembly line process, integration of lithium iron phosphate batteries, entirely new digital design for this truck. It's going to be, a mid-size pickup truck, electric. It's going to have a 0-60 time that is faster than the Mustang EcoBoost internal combustion engine vehicle, and it's going to have a $30,000 price tag. So to deliver that cost, those features, and affordability all together, that in the end of the day is going to be the thing that Ford can do. That's the thing that's it's also in our control. Like I love an answer to the question that we can either succeed or not succeed at. So we're working really hard to succeed at creating the right vehicle, and that's the only thing that we can do to solve that.
Chris, thanks. Jim Stock. Yeah. I'm sorry I had to walk in late, so maybe you've done this. But actually, Mike, I just am following up very much on this. Given that you're going to be model year 27 or 28 producing this $30,000 pickup truck, and then you expand that LFP battery platform to larger SUVs, which is where they work well. So you're going to have this big suite of those, and let's imagine that you're going to sort of try to work in sort of the smaller market too, the ones that fit on Cambridge streets. It's why in the world do you think that you couldn't meet that 50%, the EPA had this 50% penetration in their base case by 2030 and like 64% by 2033 under their regulatory standard. Now, I understand that you might not want to have the regulatory burdens. I get that. But I don't understand, what is the source of the pessimism given that you're actually out there competing with China? You're going to have protection against the Chinese imports, which would kill you. But otherwise, these are going to be super impressive vehicles, and you might actually be able to sell some credits under a tradable performance system, sell some credits to, some of the other manufacturers that aren't keeping up with you.
Jim, I think you might be right in the end, right? Now, we got a lot of work to do to get from where we are now, first generation vehicles. Again, I drive a Light myself. It's a terrific vehicle, but it's a 130 kilowatt hour NCM battery. With that configuration of vehicle, we're not going to be able to get to the place we need to get to. Now, are we going to be successful at doing all the things that we say we're going to do? Yes. Yes, we will be, right? Now, have we done that yet? No, we haven't, right? So here's our goal. Our goal is to make sure that we continue to innovate. So one thing that the company has done is when we think about developing vehicles, every vehicle kind of stands on the shoulders of the vehicle that you created and homologated and put into the market before it, right? So it's a continuous innovation. And it's hard at a company like Ford to get an opportunity to take a clean slate and start over, which is what you need to do in order to get to the price basis and the design and the features and the characteristics of the vehicle that's actually going to win in the future. So that's the thing that we have to do, right? It's an existentially important thing for Ford to do as we think about our design mentality. So we've actually created a new design piece of Ford. We call our Skunk Works project. It's in Long Beach, in California. If I show up with my badge and I try to get in, my badge doesn't work. You can't if you're Ford. It's for people who aren't from the big Ford, right? And that's by design because we had to think differently about how we deliver this product to the future. So that first truck that we're going to be making in Kentucky, it's going to have the LFP battery, mid-sized pickup truck, $30,000 base. It's going to be based on the design that we made in Long Beach in the Skunk Works project. Instead of having all these different components in the vehicle that you have from tier one suppliers that are all kind of wired together, you're going to have one single operating system in the vehicle. It's going to be simpler, lots of cost advantages. But we've got to stick the landing there, right? And how does that translate into larger vehicles? Well, some of this is to be determined, right? There's still going to be some real challenges, I think, when we think about larger vehicles and getting that cost down. What's the next generation of batteries look like, et cetera? So, I mean, to just wrap up your question, we are optimistic about the future. Like, we think we can compete and win. The competition in China is prodigious. Like, they're already, the thing that I said about the blank sheet of paper, they've already done that. Because they didn't have a 100-year tradition of great cars to build on. You know, Chinese did not make good internal combustion engine cars. So by definition, they had to throw a lot of engineering capability and money at it. And so they've kind of done the thing that we're doing now. So we've got a knife fight ahead of us. And are we confident? Yeah, that's why I came to Ford. But we've got some execution ahead of us, which we think we're going to be successful at.
Thank you. You talked about tariffs a bit, and I think your own comments might have suggested that they're a bit of a double-edged sword. Yes, they create space for the U.S. to stand up its own globally competitive EV sector. At the same time, they reduce competition, perhaps reduce the space, the pressure for innovation, perhaps increase costs to consumers and reduce consumer choice. So given those trade-offs, what would you think, and you were referring to predictability in policy, what would you think about a 5-year program, let's say, where the US has tariff protection, other forms of import protection, perhaps progressively declining over time. But at the end of that, the US domestic industry will have to stand up to global competition domestically. Does that seem like a reasonable policy choice for given the double-edged nature of tariff protection?
Yeah, so I mean, the devil's in the details, and I guess it would depend on what that covers. I mean, I guess the thing I'll emphasize is, first of all, I agree with your observation around the double-edged sword, right? I mean, a tariff it's a tool, like a hammer or a spatula or anything, right? It's a thing that can do something effective, right? So, Ford's not pro-tariff or anti-tariff, right? There are useful applications for tariffs. We think a regime that protects, strengthens our integrated North American supply chain, really super important. If the specific question is vehicle-on-vehicle tariffs, how long does that need to be put in place? Well, I mean, I'll make an observation, right? So we know that if in the current environment where our domestic, our North American supply chain is being squeezed, like in an earnings call, like we heard, the General Motors CFO, state that like they make a lot of their 2-row SUVs in Korea. So as you lower that tariff, and I think it was at 30% when he made this comment, it's like, yeah, we're with all the advantages of manufacturing there, we're happy with the 30% tariff. We can still beat U.S. manufacturers simply because it's structurally more expensive here in the United States in many areas. So certainly when you bring that down to 15%, and domestic manufacturers are still dealing with tariffs on our integrated North American supply chain, it actually ironically puts American manufacturers at a disadvantage. Now, there are a lot of things you can do on that, right? And I think there's a constructive conversation going on right now to ensure that we end up in a place where we're strengthening American manufacturing, and you're actually incentivizing companies to do the thing that Ford is doing now, which is to invest in Kentucky, invest in Tennessee, invest in Michigan, build LFP and NCM batteries right here in the United States. In some cases, look to strengthen our supply chain for the critical minerals, graphite and lithium. Lots that you could do to increase that production here in the United States. So it's a little bit of a non-answer to the question, right? Because it's hard to say, well, how many years do you need protection? But I will say that it is a useful thing. If you have a well-crafted set of tariffs, it's a tool that can help balance markets that can be useful. But we just need to be thoughtful about making sure that they don't punish the behavior that you're actually looking to incentivize.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for taking the time. Obviously, we're in a period where the federal government has taken a pretty big 180 swing in the view towards decarbonization and electrification. So wondering how has that or is that impacting Ford's general strategy towards electrification and in particular, like the capital investment strategy?
Yeah, so I'll start with the biggest swing at that, right? Which is, our job is to design and manufacture products that our customers love. We would love to have a stable, and I'm talking about across the range of administration, we'd love to have a stable policy that doesn't swing from one thing to the other. We have to count on that happening, right? So one thing we have to do is try to, it's a little bit tough to separate some of the signal from noise, because for us, the signal is coming from our customers, it's coming from what we can actually achieve, it's coming from our design labs. So we really have to keep our eye on the horizon, right? Because when you look at, from administration to administration, every time, there's a change of administration, a change of party, recently there's been a dramatic rewriting of what the previous administration has done. So if we anchor what we do to what we have now, we will fail, right? So we really have to be thinking about what can be accomplished in the future. Slightly more granular, right? So, as I mentioned a moment ago, we did need some immediate relief in terms of being able to meet the standard for today. Now, to Professor Stock's question a moment ago, how do we feel about how we're going to look in 5 years or 10 years? Well, listen, we got to get there, and we think we're optimistic. And again, this is driven by customers, right? This is driven by building the best product that we can get there. We think we can get there. So this is our day-to-day challenge, kind of separating some of the signal from noise, knowing that pendulum's going to continue to swing. And in that environment, so if my client is this Ford Motor Company, like how do I advise the client, like the company, about how we should be thinking about, where on the horizon we should be pointed. So I guess that's holistically how we kind of look at that challenge. But yeah, we would love stability would be great, right?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a question. Like when you mentioned affordability for the EVs, it kind of reminds me of what happens for Teslas in 2018. Like they built super factory in China that helped them to reduce the cost, and also like they expand their market share in China. Because last year my family bought their first EV in China, and we kind of swim by Tesla and local brands, but we end up by Tesla in the end. But so you can see how even though China has so competitive EV markets, Tesla still stands out because of the super factory. So I just wondering when Ford they thinking about their international strategy plan, do you think you guys gonna localize productions in different developing countries in the future?
Yeah, so when you look at Ford's business model, we generally produce locally for local. So we have a business in China. It's with a couple of joint venture partners. It's not as large as Volkswagen or General Motors or Tesla, but we produce locally for that local market and for some kind of surrounding markets. And it's worked well for us here in the United States. When we say we produce 80% of the vehicles we sell in the United States, we assemble in the United States, is because we produce in America for America. We produce Ranger pickup trucks in Argentina that are for that South American market. So everywhere we produce, I mean, again, there's lots of cross-border movement of vehicles, but our strategy tends to be that we produce in region for region. Now, interestingly, like we're building a lithium iron phosphate battery plant in Marshall, Michigan. So it's going to be one of the first large-scale automotive LFP plants in the United States. It's going to reduce our reliance on importing those batteries from China. So it is important to, and our partner there is CATL, the Chinese battery maker, right? So it is important that we can't build a wall around the United States. Like we have to, have to bring the best capabilities, we have to bring the best technology. But we think that's important for us to do that in a way that is informing and training and strengthening our American workforce here in the United States, so that we are creating opportunities here, and that's going to require the right type of partnerships. So that's kind of how we sort of are thinking about that set of challenges and opportunities. I wanted to make sure I got it, because you're right here, right?
Thank you. That's really kind. Thank you for your remarks
Yeah.
more generally. I was wondering, following back to your answer from beforehand about the chicken and egg about the energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you're taking inspiration from other issues where this has occurred before. So, for example, in Texas, where you had a very similar issue with energy providers and grid providers, both not wanting to move into the areas where the highest energy potential for generation was. The state intervened and created these competitive renewable energy zones. I was wondering if there's like maybe a conglomerate of different producers, car producers who are like trying to lobby for this, or if there's an assumption that politics is in a deadlock now when it comes to these kind of policies, or what the kind of inspiration from prior overcoming of those kind of deadlocks is.
Yeah. So that's another big question, right? So I mean, we've got a lot in common with many of our competitors, right? And so there's a trade group, trade association, or there's various trade associations actually. So there's a lot of things that we can do together. Is there going to be another big policy push in this administration? It's a little hard to envision, right? Right now. So I think what we kind of have is what we're going to have for the immediate term. And we're going to have to think, like, the next thing that we're really focused on, which is, so the tax bill is passed, the reconciliation package. And so, as you know, like, we don't follow the law, we follow the regulations that are written based on the law, right? So the important thing for us are the implementing regulations and, the devil's in the details. So for us, making sure that those implementing regulations get written in a way that strengthen American manufacturers is probably going to be the most important thing that we're sort of thinking on. But yeah, I think it's a good idea to continue to thinking about, how can we work with other manufacturers or even other industries to push for good policies.
I would like to get back a little bit with the policy side, mainly on environmental policy, and how do you see the company's environmental policy getting unfolded, and a couple of those things that you think are more important to look into. And the reason I'm asking this question is more into a financial side of the company. When you look into the PE ratio of the company, which is, much lower than the peers, with your EV business, which is losing money, or in general, the stock value for the last couple of years staying pretty much flat. I'm someone who used to have the Ford stocks, but I sold them because every time you listen to the yearly earning calls and you listen to the analyst, you see, a very restrictive view or not seeing much of a future compared to the other EV companies. So looking into the financial side, how do you see how the policy of the environmental side is going to unfold and what you're going to focus into? Yeah,
so a lot in that question. Flat stock, steady dividends, by the way. But yeah, so herein lies the challenge, right? So here's one thing that Ford did that other companies didn't. So we took our company and we split it into three pieces for purposes of reporting. So we got Model E, which is electric. We got Ford Blue, which is all the internal combustion engine vehicles. And then we've got Ford Pro, which is our commercial business. So you can open up our annual report and you can see you can see how each of those pieces are performing. Early days still for Model E because we're building, and we're getting to the point where we're going to be producing. But that's that's tough, right? Now the thing is, by being transparent, you're not changing anything, right? So you can read our annual report and you can see what Model E is doing. You got to kind of work it out in some of our competitors. They haven't done that. Now, one of the reasons we wanted to do that was we wanted to be visible and transparent around our aspirations for the future, right? Which again are challenging initially. Like everyone is going through this big transition. If you're trying to do something different, the early pieces of that are challenging. So I'd actually flip that question on its head a little bit. Like, so we're not going to be driven by environmental policy because we're a car company, right? And that's not going to that's going to be a thing that drives us. What I will say is that it is going to be incredibly important for us to win at this segment. And you see that through our actions. Like the most recent big announcement that we made was an announcement we made in Kentucky where we had the new assembly line, the implementation or integration of the lithium iron phosphate batteries that we're manufacturing in Michigan into a new line of vehicles, $30,000 vehicle that's going to be a mid-sized pickup truck that's going to have Ford Mustang type acceleration and all these other features for $30,000. So again, as we think about like how do we publicize, how do we talk about the thing that we're going to do well, like how do we get the ideas out, the thing that we have to do is invest, innovate, execute. Like that's the thing that we're going to have to do. And again, when I think about the big challenge of the level of mid-century decarbonization that's going to be necessary, electric vehicles are going to be a really important part of that. So, but for us, it's not my job title. Like I go through, like I never say the word climate. It's not part of my job. My job is sell cars. But if we are going to be a company that's going to survive another 100 years, we have to win in this space. And so you can see where our investment is. You can see what we're doing. Like you can see what we think about the future. And that's the thing that's going to drive our customer. And again, don't ask me about, the analysts and how they do don't get me started on that, right? That's for another class. But our goal is to do what we need to do to execute, and that's how we're thinking about that.
Yeah, I think also to roll back a little bit, I realized that the road to electrification involves making the cars and the charging infrastructure, but there's a bit that works with the grid that's already strained.
Yes.
So I was wondering, how does Ford engage with the government to ensure grid capacity and then resilience at large, and especially in your role, because I'm assuming there's a lot of interaction with the government on this front as well?
Yeah. So a good point, right? So for the first time, at least since I've been kind of thinking about energy issues, you're having increasing loads on grids. Like you're having more demand for electricity, which is a novel position for utilities to be in. Like they haven't had to think about this. So now with AI and with data centers and with increased electrification, you do see utilities having to think differently and more creatively about how do they do the thing that they have to do, which is have 0.00% disruption to their customers. And again, utilities, if I talked a little bit about kind of the big C conservative nature of Ford, being an established company. Utilities take that to the next level, right? And they have to. I mean, that's the way I want utilities to work because I want my lights to come on, right? But lots of challenges that we have in terms of how do we integrate, like, so we've got some great things that would allow cars to positively contribute to that, right? So I'm driving around in my F-150 Lightning, F-150. It's a rolling 130 kilowatt hour battery. And it's sitting there all day. It's sitting right now. Like, I love that truck. I love talking about it. It's sitting in a parking garage right now. And when I go home, it sits in my driveway all night. And then when I go to work, it sits in the parking garage all day, right? So there's a lot of use that you can get out of this rolling stock of batteries that I have in place that's going to require the next level of thinking between auto companies and utilities. Everything from how we can have data standards consistent so we can have more effective managed charging. Because when I plug it in, I don't care if it charges right now or if it charges in the middle of the night. All I care about is when I get to my vehicle in the morning that I have X% of charge in the vehicle. So I don't care when it charges. I could give a little bit of that power back to the utility, or the capability, that control, and the utility should be able to manage that in such a way that keeps that manages the stability of their grid. But it's going to require utilities because we do these pilots. Like Ford's got pilots with a number of utilities. We're solving different kind of research questions here and there. Is there a industry-wide effort that's efficient, that's going to lead us to implementation across all utilities in a way that's effective? We got some work to do there, right? So that's one of the things that we're really thinking about. Maybe this group can help us kind of think about some of those issues, right? It's a hard thing that we've got to work out.
Time for one more question.
One more.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for your encore performance. The questions are great and answers are great. As the chief of government policy, which I know that was an office in a large company, so thank you. What's your strategy for policy touch points in government, or how aggressive should it be to get policy to change from a corporate perspective? For example, we see Tesla and SpaceX trying to enact change as far as AI goes in vehicles, or FAA with launching large rockets. But in this advent of EV, how aggressive, what are your touch points for a company to change government policy?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a tricky question. When I think about what Ford wants, we want more job creation. We want better things for our customers. We want a better experience for the people that buy our cars, right? So, we want to be as noisy as we can in those areas. I've got the great advantage in this job that because of our overall position on many things, like I don't have a set of talking points for Democrats and Republicans. Like I've got my Ford points, and they're consistent. And you tweak a trigger word here or there, right? But they're pretty consistent. And being that as it is, I think we can be as aggressive as we can be, right? Because I think the things that we're fighting for are things that are effective and are good and are positive and create value and make people's lives better. Last thing I'll mention is that if you don't have an auto industry, like a country that doesn't have an auto industry can't defend itself. Ford was the arsenal of democracy in World War II. At our production facility where we made the B-24 bomber, we were rolling off one of those every hour by the end of World War II. Jeeps and auto engines, all of these things came out of Ford facilities. We made ventilators during the pandemic. And so we've lost so much of our industrial muscle. I mean, this thing here wasn't made in America, right? Your grandma's RCA television in the parlor room, in the cabinet, that was made in the US. All those vacuum tubes you get at Radio Shack. Some of you guys remember that. We don't make any of that stuff anymore. We don't make any of it. And it's not a certainty that we'll be making cars in America, right? Now we think we can, and we think we should, and we think we will, right? That's our prime directive. But I think we should be very aggressive at pushing these policies because it's more than just economic development and jobs. It's, do you have the industrial capability and wherewithal to build those systems that you're going to need in order to make sure that you can defend the country? And so we think that's really important, and we want to address that with as loud a voice as we can.
Great. So before we wrap up, let me know we'll meet again a week from today in the Energy Policy Seminar. We'll have a talk by Marilyn Brown of Georgia Tech. Marilyn will speak on powering progress, technology, policy, and innovation across the United States. And second, please join me in thanking Chris Smith for his insights and fantastic talk today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff.